Hello, my name is Caitlin, and this is an analysis of the Incel community for Sociology 225. So what is the Incel community, you might ask? Well, the term incel has somewhat changed over time, but it originated in 1997 before Facebook, before Instagram and MySpace, with a woman named Alana. I'm not going to say her last name for privacy reasons. She started dating in her mid-20s and was having some challenges with connecting with men. She started dating and started this website called the Involuntary Celibate Project for both men and women struggling to form intimate, loving relationships. Great origin when you really think about it. Instead of isolating herself, Alana chose to try to create an online community of like-minded people. According to Alana, even one couple got married from being on the site through itself. And according to Alana, the term involuntary celibate was shortened into incel, so just so it was said easier. And thus the term incel was born. So most people nowadays aren't really aware that this is where the term originated from and are now mostly only familiar with the toxic masculine extremist side of incels. The Canadian government actually defines incels as people, primarily men, who ascribe sexual frustration to personal and external barriers, including physical and mental attributes, and socially constructed notions of attractiveness and status. Many express a sense of aggrieved entitlement. Others reinforce caricatures of sexually successful men, also known as Chads, and women, Stacys, that have encouraged a homogenizing of transnational ideology. Perpetrators of incel-related violence have also been canonized. Examples of this include Elliot Rodger and Alec Minassian, whose acts are revered. With the development of the internet and sites like 4chan, Reddit, and Twitter, now known as X, individuals were able to connect with each other faster than ever and anonymously. But before we get into that, I'd like to further understand what the modern-day incel believes and advocates for. So, in a peer-reviewed study by O'Malley, Holt, and Holt by the Journal of Interpersonal Violence, they said, quote, employed an inductive, qualitative analysis of over 8,000 posts made in 2 online incel communities to identify norms, values, and beliefs of these groups from a subcultural perspective. Analysis found that the incel community was structured around 5 interrelated normative orders: the sexual market, women as naturally evil, legitimizing masculinity, male oppression, and violence. In addition to these 5 topics, I would like to pose my own theorized factors as to why incels exist and continue to persist. I would also like to focus on the sociocultural proponents like social isolation, media and cultural narrative, gender norms and expectations, online echo chambers, economic and social disparities, mental health challenges, peer and family influences, and unrealistic expectations and entitlement. But before we get into that, I'd like to discuss some theories from sociologists that I've introduced in the past that will be relevant to our future discussion. First theory I'd like to talk about is the anomie and strain theory. This was proposed by Merton R.K. in 1938 in his Social Structure and Anomie, American Sociological Review. The anomie theory seeks to explain non-biological deviations from prescribed patterns of conduct. Our primary aim lies in discovering how social structures exert a definite pressure upon certain persons in society to engage in nonconformist rather than conformist conduct. The anomie structure describes 2 important elements of social and cultural structure. 1, culturally defined goals and interests, and 2, institutionalized norms. An institution in the anomie theory is something that has regulations and required procedures for attaining these ends. Balance between the institution and individuals who choose to conform only remains satisfied when the individual feels satisfied with the achievements offered through the institution and the success of the institution. In our case, the incel, the individual that creates the social norms, and the internet / web forums or YouTube, the institution. The platform, such as Reddit, is only successful if they have regular individuals that enjoy and interact with their program. In another study by Agnew R. in 1992, the Foundation for General Strain Theory of Crime and Delinquency, the strain theory focuses on the individual in their immediate social environment. Strain theory focuses explicitly on negative relationships with others, where the individual is not being treated the way that they ought to be treated. This focuses on the absence of significant relationships. In particular, delinquency is most likely when 1. The adolescent is not attached to parents, school, or other institutions. 2. The parents fail to monitor and effectively sanction deviance. 3. The adolescent's actual or anticipated investment in conventional society is minimal. And 4. The adolescent has not internalized conventional beliefs. The next theory is called social identity theory. The theory of social identity rests on an assumption that categorization is the process by which people live, order, and render predictable information about the world that they live in. This process of categorization operates on objects, other people, and oneself. In relation to internet communities, this shows how extreme groups can come about. Things like motivations for the individual to feel good about themselves and perceived inclusion creates a situation where one's own members of your in-group feel united against a strong other, in this case, women or Stacys and Chads. The third theory I want to discuss is social learning theory by Bandera in 1977. Social learning theory examines how children learn behavior through observation, reinforcement, and mimicry, which is foundational for their learnings and development of attitudes developed within online groups. Akers kind of built off of Bandura's theory with a general theory of crime and deviance, and he adds to the social learning theory by exploring group deviance and how group dynamics affects behavior. This will be important in understanding why beliefs between incel communities intensify to a degree where they could even inflict harm on others or themselves. The fourth theory that I'm going to talk about is deviance application and moral panic. This was first proposed by Cohen and Young, and they built upon it with different studies. Cohen, in Folk Devils and Moral Panics, examines how people would respond to perceived threats to social order by stigmatizing and demonizing certain groups to make them seem more dangerous or morally evil. Cohen describes moral panic as a huge overreaction by the public to perceived behavior by a group that threatens societal norms or safe moral practices. Cohen also describes deviance application as a process of one's group labeling another as deviant, and the labeled deviant group begins to internalize the label and actually reinforce the behavior and belief that the other group is putting onto them. This will be more relevant in our topic of incels because it shows the concepts of moral panic and deviance amplification, both of which are highly prevalent on the internet. Some examples of this could be TikTok trends, hating on men, furries as perverts or weirdos. These perceptions from the public that are placed onto men, or in this example, reinforces and stigmatizes these communities and creates a deep internalization within the groups that may amplify the actual deviant behaviors and increase the social solidarity within the group. It actually makes the group form closer together, creating a us versus them situation. To kind of build upon that, Young, in his paper, The Drug Takers, The Social Meaning of Drug Use, contrasts Durkheim's theory of social deviance amplification and posits the deviance amplification spiral, which is a societal reaction that intensifies over time and intensifies deviant behavior into a continuous feedback loop. This starts by one, an initial deviant act leads to societal reaction. 2, increased societal control or policing escalates and labeling of individuals as deviant. 3, stigmatized individuals react by isolating and retreating into their subgroup, reinforcing deviant behaviors. 4, as the group becomes more closed off, the behaviors will turn away from the mainstream cultural norms, and the cycle continues from there. In reference to incel communities online, you could see how this would be useful for us to examine. In reference to incel communities online, Young's work shows an increased social media attacks and criticism can push individuals in communities deeper into deviant identities. This creates a negative cycle that is mirrored by society because the incel receives positive validation from within the group and perceives greater persecution from the other group. This helps to explain intensive radicalization and why some young men fall so deep down the rabbit hole. Now we move on to the story of Elliot Rodger. Now, this story is really long, and I'm not going to get into all of the details of the story as it is a bit graphic, and it's not completely necessary for us to know everything, but I'd still like to give this story as I feel like this is a really important baseline to gather why incels are so dangerous today and kind of understand where they could originate from. So at this point in this video, you may be asking yourself, okay, Caitlin, what's the big deal? Why should we care about inceldom? And what is so bad about being an incel? Well, I want to tell you a story. And the story is about a young man named Elliot Rodger. Elliot was born into a wealthy family where his mom and dad doted on his every need. They were gentle and well involved in his life, as many parents of incels tend to be, actually. Elliot had his own BMW and often bragged about the expensive polos and colognes that he would wear to impress girls. That was one thing in Elliot's mind that he could not get: a girlfriend. One day, Elliot decided he was going to lose his virginity. He felt some pressure as he was almost 22 years old, and in his mind, that was unacceptable. On a summer night in July 2013, he brushed his hair, put on his favorite polo, and grabbed his most expensive pair of Gucci sunglasses, misted himself with a bit of cologne, and made his way to a nearby party. Elliot was anxious, as many of us would be. He didn't know anyone there, and he was pretty intoxicated from pre-drinking some vodka, but he was feeling good. The good feeling stopped when he saw an Asian man talking to a pretty blonde girl, which infuriated Elliot, as he felt he deserved to be the one talking to that woman, completely neglecting the fact that he had done nothing to put himself out there other than appear at the party. It's almost like he expected the girls to flock to him as soon as he stepped foot inside. It wasn't long before Elliot actually started to lose his cool. He needed attention, and at that point, he didn't care whether it was positive or negative. He then took out his anger on some women after calling someone unattractive and attempting to shove several people off the ledge of a balcony. A group of men had apparently been told of Elliot's behavior at the party and took it upon themselves to push him off of the balcony, which resulted in a fractured ankle for Elliot. Elliot limped off, cursing the place and everyone in it, but he realized that he had lost his sunglasses and his necklace. When Elliot tried to go back to the party, he was met with an attack from another group of men, in which he suffered some scrapes, bruises, and a black eye. Licking his wounds, Elliot hobbled home. A neighbor actually saw Elliot that night returning home in tears, vowing to kill the men that attacked him and the other partygoers, and maybe even himself. Elliot was emotionally distraught after this incident, and his father encouraged Elliot to file a police report, which ended up being closed as the investigators believed that he was the instigator. Now, why did I decide to tell this story? I told you this to give you an idea of the type of triggering event that caused a cascade of hatred. Everyone in the world deals with rejection on a daily basis. Some of us are more equipped to handle it than others, and Elliot clearly was not. Elliot's parents did everything they could to get him the help that they needed, but at the end of the day, Elliot did not take his medication and consistently dismissed different therapist counsel. It seemed like Elliot could not connect with anyone in a meaningful enough way to change his behavior. Online, Elliot portrayed himself as what the manosphere would call a high-value man. He shared selfies of himself on plane rides to renowned tourist destinations and pictures of his car and other expensive objects. Besides endorsing his rich lifestyle, paid by his parents, by the way, he would regularly blog his difficulties in socializing and connecting with others, particularly women. Around this time is when Elliot began to think vengefully and fantasize about harming those who had harmed him in the past, and those happy couples that dared to exist in his presence. Roger would drive around the city in his BMW, recording local couples, while complaining about how lonely and angry it made him feel to see other happy couples.
I've been doing a lot of thinking about how sad and unfair my life has been, all because girls haven't been attracted to me.
Where he believed he had no choice but to exact his revenge on society that denied him sex and love that he rightfully deserved. Elliot carefully gathered multiple semi-automatic pistols, knives, and wrote a 137-page manifesto in which he described his life and the events that led him up to the day of retribution. May 23rd, 2014, Roger carried out the first part of his plan by stabbing and killing his two roommates, Wei Han, David Wang, Che Yang James Hong, and their friend George Chen, in the apartment in which they resided together. Rogers made his way to a local Starbucks where he emailed his manifesto to 34 people and uploaded a 7-minute video to a YouTube channel called Elliot's Rogers Retribution. He later drove to the Alpha Phi sorority house where he was denied entry, thwarting his original plan, and instead noticed 3 beautiful girls. He pulled up in his car and shot them point blank, killing Veronica Wise and Catherine Cooper, while injuring the third woman. Elliot had drove past a deli, shooting inside, and killing Christopher Michaels Martinez. As he drove through Isla Vista, he continued shooting outside of his car in his driver's side window, wounding several people and striking others with his car. After the police started to give chase, he then crashed his BMW into another pedestrian and crashed off the roadside. Elliot was later found dead by police from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. The result of Elliot's attack ended up in 6 people, not including Elliot, dying, with 14 others sustaining injuries from being struck with his car or by gunfire. Next, we're going to talk about the sociocultural and economic interactions with the internet that Elliot Rodger had throughout his life. Elliot Rodger's story, like I said, is a long one, and there are many details that I had to leave out. But there is also a lot of information about his past and his parents that have given multiple interviews to help inform the discussion around Elliot. From the outside, he was a highly troubled person with many social factors influencing him to make the decision to go on a murder spree. Elliot was not the first of his kind, but was and probably is the most prolific and most detailed account of an incel exacting revenge on society through inflicting physical pain on others. Because of the reach of Rodger's YouTube videos documenting his thoughts, we are able to observe some key messages, ideals, and beliefs that Rodgers held against society. In psychology, the nature versus nurture debate was once hotly debated. Nature being representative of one's genetics and born-in factors, while nurture is representative of one's environment when growing up and experiencing the world. This could include the way that one is parented, relationships and friendships in school, siblings, economic status, race, religion, and so forth. In Elliot's case, he was raised in a family with a mom and dad for the beginning of his childhood until around age 7 when his parents were divorced. His dad remarried a Moroccan actress a year later, and we can only really guess how this affected Elliot's well-being. It's worth noting, though, that the year of the divorce was the same year that Elliot began his lifelong interaction with therapy and life coaches. It is probably safe to say that Elliot was deeply affected by the divorce of his parents, as his parents were the closest thing he had to viewing a functional, heterosexual relationship between his mother and his father. But Caitlin, you may be saying, I know lots of people who have divorced parents and never grew up to hate women or to kill people. Yeah, me too. But we can't discount these factors when examining someone's life and the context of the community. Further into his childhood, we uncover that Elliot was bullied frequently and had a hard time fitting in with his peer groups. He then combated his loneliness by going online. And this is where the similarities for some of you may vary. Elliot made his way onto online, but not like online onto Poptropica, Webkins, or cool math games like I would have been. He preferred forums and misogynistic websites. He became infatuated with the fictional cyber world of video games and began to isolate himself from making any other meaningful relationships. In high school, Elliot continued to be bullied and switched schools, which caused an even further break from the social codes of conduct. Kids at school saw Elliot as weird, and Elliot had grown content with the idea of making no friends. The misogynistic views of his online peers must have started to bleed through the cracks of Elliot's real life, because he started collecting and becoming more obsessed with the idea of portraying wealth as a way of getting girls. In one quote from Elliot's retribution video before his killing spree, he said, I mean, look at me, I'm gorgeous. You girls just don't see it. I don't understand why you're so repulsed by me. This, to me, shows the confusion and general feeling that Elliot experienced on a daily basis, rejection and loneliness. In a study of involuntary celibacy and online culture, they found that incels like Rogers used forums and as methods of social support and perceived validation through online folks. A sense of disenfranchisement may lead young males toward these online communities where pseudoscientific but highly attractive philosophy serves to begin the process of radicalization, consistent with the male support theory, the social group processes and perceptions of masculinity, which may contribute to real-world violence committed by incels. In simple terms, online communities provide reassurance and support to young men who feel rejected by society. In addition to giving support, though, they begin to create an occult-like indoctrination and misinformation designed to brainwash and validate feelings of voiceless young men. This brings us to the end of our analysis of the incel community. We covered a lot of ground, from Alana's well-intentioned project to the evolution of inceldom, into the ideology fueled by online spaces, and finally the tragic consequences of that ideology epitomized by individuals like Elliot Rodger, whose story we got to learn. Through the lens of sociological theories, we've seen how factors like the anomie, social identity, deviance application, and online echo chambers can create and sustain a subculture that thrives on shared grievances and distorted narratives around society and others as a whole. These theories not only help us understand incels, but also provide tools for analyzing other marginalized or extreme online groups. But what does this all mean for us as a society? To me, inceldom is not just a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked online radicalization. It's also a reflection of broader societal failures. It exposes how isolation, unaddressed mental health challenges, and rigid gender expectations can create a breeding ground for resentment and violence. So, where do we go from here? While it's easy to demonize incels like Elliot Rodger, a sociological approach pushes us to ask harder questions. How do we combat social isolation in a hyper-connected but increasingly lonely world, especially for young men? How do we challenge toxic narratives about masculinity and gender roles that are often portrayed online through online groups with little or no pushback from other media? And perhaps most importantly, how can we foster communities that prioritize empathy and understanding over division and hatred? How can online communities and platforms keep their users safe and avoid this division of hatred? As individuals, we can start fostering open, judgment-free conversations, and by being mindful of the content we consume and share online. On a larger scale, we need policies and practices to address mental health, promote digital literacy, and create spaces for healthy, inclusive dialogue. The story of the incel community isn't an easy one to hear, and it certainly doesn't have easy solutions. But if we can learn anything from this discussion, I hope that it's that we can understand the roots of social phenomenon as the first way of addressing them. And perhaps that's where the power of sociology begins. It's in helping us make sense of the world around us, so together we can change it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video has encouraged you to think critically, ask some questions, and engage with the world around you in a more empathetic and informed way. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.